So, hello and welcome to the podcast, The Ups and Downs of a Small Business Owner, where we hope to show you exactly what it's like to grow a business. Today, I'm here with Alexis Kingsbury, author, speaker, podcast host, serial entrepreneur. Is there anything else to add to that?
It's weirdly, there probably is a list of other things that we could add, like attempted comedian, music producer, like all sorts of weird things. So the nice thing is, particularly with anything relating to art, you don't have to be successful at it to be it. But yeah, no, I think that's probably a long enough list.
Maybe dad as well.
Oh, I mean, that's one of the things that I probably focus on the most. And fortunately, it seemed to be genuinely quite good at when I put the time in. And that's been really important for me. So, yeah.
Okay, so if we talk about kind of you from the beginning, how would you, as a person, how would you describe yourself?
I suppose the thing that describing myself is tricky, because I think for me, in terms of my journey along the way, a big part of it has been self-discovery and really understanding, like, who am I and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, so describing myself, I'd say that one of the things that is probably most important to me is how I spend my time and the impact that I have. So I care a lot about spending my time with my wife and my kids and making sure that the people that we work with get time for what matters most as well. But I think the other thing about me is I'm very playful. So that increasingly I've lent into that. I think that particularly over the last few years of learning about the fact that I'm autistic ADHD and just being more authentically myself has really helped me tap into that. Whereas I think that there was a period in my life, which we'll probably get into, where it made more sense to be very professional and quite formal. And I think that really set my self-discovery back quite a lot, and actually my success as a result as well.
Okay, so I guess if we go back, so kind of before you started work, like, I don't know, you're in school or coming out of school, depending where you want to go. What started you along on your journey? Where was this one of the key points that you move forward?
Yeah, so I'd say I've always been interested in building stuff. Like, if I can remember back to being a kid, like 8, 9, 10 years old, I was always like trying to build like rockets out of lemonade bottles and toilet roll tubes and so on. And so I think I was probably about age 12 when I was essentially trying to start businesses. And so it started with like doing a local newsletter for the village I was in. And then I think by the time I was like 14, 15, I was building websites and also washing the cars of people who lived in the village for money and cleaning their gardens and mowing and sweeping and all these things. And it was because in my head, it was like, I'm ready. Like, I want to get on with building businesses and doing that, even at that age, while at school and then at, sixth form. And then while at university, I was running businesses alongside my studies. And so I think that's always been a core of, I kind of just love the idea of doing it and love a lot of just the learning that's involved in that journey as well. But yeah, those initial businesses I was terrible at.
So where did you get them ideas? Was that from like your parents? Have you seen them run businesses, or what was your drive?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely an element of it. Like, certainly the fact that both of them had run or were running businesses meant that I felt like it was possible. Like, I didn't feel like, that's a really scary thing to run a business. It felt like something that just people did. And so if I wanted to do it, I could do it. I think I was always sort of very entrepreneurial in mindset and so on. So I don't think I needed a lot of encouragement in that respect. Possibly the opposite, to actually, you do need to do your studies and homework and all those sorts of things. Whereas I probably used to see those as all of it as a distraction from, building websites and businesses. But yeah, I think certainly seeing my dad, who had run a startup software business and then had sold that, and him, he'd gone into venture capital and so on. And my mum had started a training business about a few years after I was born. And also actually then my stepfather, so when my parents got divorced, my stepfather owned, at the point that him and mum got together, he owned I think it was about 8 local pharmacies. So as a result, I'd got 3 role models or people that were significant in my life that all own businesses. So yeah, it wasn't a thing that was scary to me.
Right. Okay. So what was the dream then? I guess you're doing these car washes, you're doing these newsletters, you're building websites. Like, if we go back to that Alexis, what did he want? What was his goal?
He would have described it back then, embarrassingly, as be bigger than Branson. And so very specifically, like particularly after reading, I think it was like Screw It, Let's Do It was one of his sort of earlier books. Reading that and reading about his history. I think there was another one that I remember having and reading at the time that went sort of back through the history and him doing a magazine, when he first started. I started my magazine a bit earlier than Richard did, But back then, that was the idea. And I remember having these dreams of flying in a plane that one of my companies owned and staying in a hotel that one of my companies owned and so on, which is hilarious now for me to think about, because that would be a nightmare for me for so many reasons. And particularly, I love adventure. The idea of going to places that I have then spent a load of time at and set up for work. No, like right now we own a motorhome and just travel off and, stay in a vineyard or even a pub car park, whatever. It's it's part of the adventure. So the idea of I'm going to go on these, very corporate-y things like Hilton or Trump or whatever is just oh no, why was I thinking I wanted that? But I think it was because I was reading these books at that age and trying to set my goals high, because that was one of the things I was getting from these books is, think bigger and so on. So I think that was my childish attempt at doing that back then. But I wasn't really clear on what mattered back then.
So what did matter back then?
Well, back then, what I thought mattered was, just creating something that everyone was aware of. And I'm sure there would be a huge element of ego there. I mean, particularly at school, I was heavily bullied. So there was probably an element of, I'll show them. Whereas when over the following years, decades, my life has become entirely about actually being able to build a life of meaning and spending time with people that matter to me, and particularly with my wife and my kids. But that was something that I had in mind even before I met my now wife. I already knew that I wanted to be, honestly, I wanted to be a different parent to the parents that I had. Particularly, I mentioned, my parents got divorced when I was, so as a result of that happened at a very early age and was hugely impactful on how I viewed life and relationships, but also a combination of that time and everything that was going on during that time, but also my mum setting up her business. I felt like I didn't have a lot of time with my parents, and that the time I did have was probably quite transactional and so on. And so we didn't have a lot of time where we'd play together. And I think particularly with how playful I am, I think that because I'm so playful, as a person, I was keen to make sure that I got time to play with my kids and that I got that time of closeness. And I think also fear of going down the same route as my father and ending up with divorce as well led me to make sure that I was nurturing the relationship with my partner much more. And that's not to say I didn't make mistakes. I definitely did, and happy to talk about them. But that was much higher on my priority list than perhaps early on when I was just thinking I'll grow big businesses. And so the more I embraced that, it both changed the goal, because actually why create a load of, airlines and hotel businesses or whatever if that's not taking me towards that goal, but also made me much happier.
I'm going to dig into it, and I know you're probably expecting it, but you mentioned the time and family life and stuff like that. How do you keep everything going? Like, running a business takes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Having good relationships with your kids and your wife and family and friends and everything else, time is taken and it's extremely precious. How do you manage keeping everybody happy?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things. So that the first thing, which perhaps is a lesson that I still take from those days of studying Richard Branson, is a reminder that everyone has the same amount of time. And time is, we measure time by virtue of an approximation of how fast our planet spins and how fast it rotates around the sun. That's literally every measurement of time that we have is set up around that, including even when we're measuring distance for far celestial objects, we measure light years, which is itself an approximation of how far light travels in one of our Earth years. Everything is so relative to basically just the position and movement of objects that we are physical. So the first thing is to realize almost how silly all of that is, and then go, well, actually, and then if you look at other people like Richard Branson, people even one might look up to, and say, well, they've got the same amount of time. Everything is relative. And that means that when we look at the time that you have, it's not about spending more time, getting more time, is choosing how you use the time you have. And I often use the example of, like, hypothetically, let's say your favorite, business owner, entrepreneur, whatever, inspiring role model, let's say that they bought your business. How much of the activities that you currently do in your business would they still do? Like, if Richard Branson bought your business tomorrow, how many of the meetings and the activities, the tasks, etc., that you've currently got planned for the next month would Richard Branson expect to do? When you start going, it nearly rounds to zero. You start realizing actually it's all relative. Like, it's not about like how you shovel the stuff together. It's just picking. And so particularly as it relates to, how do I make sure that basically when my kids come back from school, or often I'll pick them up, that I don't carry on working. I know so many business owners where they go, oh yeah, so I do that and then I go back to work in the evening. Something I used to do in the very early days, but I haven't done that for years and years and years, because I prioritize then the time with my partner and the time with my kids. And actually then, it goes time with kids and then put them to bed at like 8:30. Then it's time with my partner. And then I'm looking towards bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10:30. I'm not thinking, right, let me get back onto work. And if I am doing work that I'm excited about, typically I'll do it first thing in the morning when everyone else is asleep and I aren't able to spend it with them. So it'd be like 4:30, 5 a.m., 5:30 or whatever. But that's because I'm excited to do it rather than feeling like I have to. And partly it's my own personal rhythm and so on. But I don't feel that it then detracts away from time with them. So when my son comes down in the morning at like 6:30, I'll stop and do something fun with him. Like, we've been literally writing a book on time, a sort of fantasy book on time and the concepts of time, for fun, with poems and all sorts of things. But I'll then do that, and then it'll be 7 o'clock and it's time to get the kids ready for school, and we'll do that, and then we'll run into school together, and then I'll have coffee with my wife and maybe friends, and then I'll start work. Parkinson's law applies here. Like, generally the work that you've got to do will swell to fill the time allowed. And so if you make it so that you can basically work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, your work will find a way to fit that time. And then of course you don't have time to do anything else that perhaps matters more to you. So that's how I always look at it. And as a result, try and prioritize accordingly and use a lot of time blocking to make sure that phenomenon doesn't happen.
And then, you mentioned that. I think that's an incredible way of doing it, and that's the timing. But also, like, being engaged with the kids, being engaged with your wife. Like, there's a difference between being there and there's a difference between being present. And I think it sounds like you're trying to be present in all their moments. Would you say you're 100% present all the time for them?
Oh, no, I make regular mistakes on that. I'd say I'm still better than most. And I think that's the important thing. Is it's a little bit like with business goals. Like, you set a big goal, you shoot for the stars. And then when you fall short, that's not failure. Like, you've stretched, and then means that you fall short. They say, then you hit the moon, but it's like, that's already a great achievement. And I suppose that's the approach that I still have with my partner and kids, is I don't get it right all the time, but because I make it a focus, I do a pretty good job. So yeah, I think I can give specific examples if that's helpful. So for example, I remember that over dinner time, one of the things that's important to us is, as a family, we have family dinner time, and that we're able to talk about what we've been doing and, how was your school day, and actually properly talk about that. But I remember when sometimes the kids would get distracted and then they hop off and go try and do a thing, or start, go off to go reading or whatever. And we were like, no, we need to, bring this back and so on. And particularly when they were young, it's like, right, we'll have a system with marbles. So everyone gets a jar of marbles. And if some kind of thing, like you get up and walk off, or, whatever, you'd lose a marble. And if you lose all of your marbles by the end of dinner, then there's no pudding, there's no dessert, right? And what was great was my wife encouraged that actually one of the ways in which one might lose a marble is by getting distracted by your device and ending up on your phone, which would often happen to me. Like, I would, get a notification, or often the trap that I'll fall into. I think partly because of sort of ADHD, but I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with just generally, is you'll pick out your phone to do something legitimately part of the group. So for example, like, oh, when is that birthday party that you're going to be going to on Saturday or Sunday? Let me just quickly check. And then of course the other notification comes up, or you look at the calendar and go, oh, that's on Saturday. And then I'll just quickly to reply to that. And before you know it, like, you just ignoring the rest of the family. And so, I'd lose marbles for that kind of behavior. And even now, like, I'm much better at it. I'm certainly more aware of, particularly if someone asks me to do something on my phone when I'm at the dinner table or just generally, I clock it as like, ooh, there's a potential trap here. Like, it's almost like they're going to trap me because, my wife will say, when is the end of term? Like, when did the kids finish on Thursday, Friday, or whatever? Fake example, because she would almost always know, and I'm the one that would be asking that question. But it's that. Oh, I'll quickly check. That's a 5-second Google, and then you're stuck. So I make mistakes like that still all the time, but it's not about being perfect. It's about continually trying. And you made that point around kids and relationships just generally. It's about presence, it's about quality, and it's about quantity of time. And it reminds me of a quote that I remember of reading a book by Brian Tracy, where he said, kids spell love, Time. And when you realize that, and it's, as we're talking about, it's the quality of that time as well. Like, you could argue every time you look down at your phone, while you're on the phone, you're not spending time. You're in the room, but you're not with them. When you look at it that way, it changes your entire approach.
I think somebody said to me, every time you look at your phone, you're telling your kids that phone is more important than them. And that's when it really kind of hit home for me. It's like, okay, that phone is more important than my kid. And in no way that should ever be a thing, but we do it. And I put my hands up, I do it as well. Like, I get home, I'm sat there, an email or notification comes through, as you say, you go on it for something and you look at it. So it's just how do you minimize it and stop it happening as much as possible, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's two sides to it. So I think one is being aware, and whether that, like, for some people it might, and I've definitely had this at points in my life, is actually better just to be like, you know what, for dinner I'm going to go put my phone over there so it's out of sight and mind, and so on. I think certainly when I'm in person meetings or even having coffee, beer with friends, etc., I never put my phone on the table. I see a lot of people doing that, and then they get distracted by it, because particularly if it's face up, it like flashes up and they're straight down there. And also, I often have all my notifications set up so it doesn't even vibrate. So I have to look at my phone to get notifications, which sometimes cause other problems. But like, I've had to go that far to reduce the pull that it has. But the other side that's often not talked about is how you spend your time instead. So something that I think a lot of parents struggle with, and I think it's a stereotype that typically dads, but I think it's there's a truism there, and certainly I struggled with it, was how to play with your children. I know that certainly my parents, and particularly I've talked about it, my mum didn't really know, particularly when we were young as kids, like how to spend time with us in a playful way. And other people might have had that experience of you're there trying to play with them, but it feels like they're in their own world playing that thing. And maybe even you try and get involved and they're like, no, don't do it that way. And then it's at that point, you're like, I'll just quickly check my phone and you're gone. And I think TV shows like Bluey, for example, did a real incredible, and it's emotional and it's funny and you get it, but also I think one of the main things that they were trying to teach was how, as adults, particularly dads, but as adults, you can play with your children in a way that's fulfilling for you as well, and means that you're able to enjoy the time with your kids in a way that means that you're not being distracted by things because you're enjoying it. And so for me, when they're really young, I would just play some of the games that we saw on Bluey, whether it was the taxi game, the hospital game, like all of those ones that are in like series 1. But in more recent years, it's developed, and now we do things like Dungeons and Dragons together, which led to us then writing songs together about what was happening in the story. And then that led to us writing the actual story as a book. And then that led to us writing a series of books, and then like artifacts that come out of that book, and just incredible journeys from that we then now do projects together that I'm as invested, I'm more invested in than them. But we do it because it's fun and it's a thing we have together that's very special and allows a deeper connection than, thinking, oh, well, they're playing Barbies and I don't really know how to play Barbies and whatever. So I'll just stay out of this.
I'm not going to do that because
Totally.
that's for kids.
Yeah. Do you want to play footy? You don't want to play footy? Oh, I'll be on my phone then.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Yeah. I spent the other day climbing across bridges from alligators and snakes to pillows on our living room floor. And my wife comes in whilst we're hopping across them.
What
are you doing?
What, out of interest, what was your response in that moment?
Get off the floor. The alligators are going to get you.
That's what I was hoping.
What are you doing?
Yeah. What are you doing? You're going to be eaten by alligators. Was her response to then jump off, or was it?
No, she jumped onto you. It was great fun.
Perfect. Brilliant parenting. And I think that's the key. It's like when you lean into that, I think you start to value it so much. Because I think otherwise, like, I enjoy working. I think that's the thing, is when I talk about not working in evenings, not working in weekends, etc., I think it's easy to assume like, oh, well, that's because Alexis doesn't like work and he's just trying to avoid it as much as possible. And it's not that. I love it. Like, and that used to be a problem for me. Like, I would spend a lot of my time. I remember being at university, I'd do the minimum I could to get great grades and really, tighten that time, and came up with some brilliant hacks for doing really good dissertations. Nowadays with AI, oh my God, I'd have had it done in 10 minutes. But like back then, I was really good at that. But then I'd work on my business, and I'd work well into the night. I'd start in the morning because I loved it. But the problem is that, yes, you love your business, but what does that say to the other people that you're meant to love? And do they feel, if you're spending 10, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, or 60, 70, 80 hours a week on the business and not with them, because typically is, you work about as much as you sleep and then everything else kind of fits around it. What does it say to everyone else? And also your opportunity to build those relationships and learn how to play is diminished. And so it's about making it as fun for you that you look forward to. Like, that's the thing for me, is I look forward to spending that time as much as they do.
I mean, I've spoken to quite a few like millionaires, multi-millionaires and stuff like that. And a lot of them have said along their journey, they've lost so much because they've been focused on becoming that multi-millionaire. They then don't have anyone or friends left.
No.
Because they...
Agreed. And I will say, because there's not a lot of people that are either able to say it or do say it, you can totally, in my experience, you can totally become multi-millionaire and still do everything I've just described. And the reason is because I've found that, but back to Parkinson's law, in that work fills to the time available. And so the more that I've even found, the more that I restrict the time I have, the more purposeful I am about how I use it for my work. And actually, the more strategic I am, the better results I get. But also the better I show up. I know that some of my worst, least productive weeks are the ones where I've worked the most number of hours, because my ability to show up authentically, creatively, with energy, enthusiasm, etc., is diminished because I've not been exercising. I've not been, resting my brain. I've not been sleeping. I've not been spending the time with the family and so on. And whereas some of my best weeks have come because I've just managed that amazing 3-hour working period one morning when I'm feeling at my best. And I think that's the thing with running a business, is it's not about the time you put in. It's everything is measured on results. And that's scary and freeing at the same time, because we all know as business owners, we've all had an hour that has generated huge revenues or results or insight that reduces costs and drops profit to the bottom line and all that sort of stuff, or read a book that's been life-changing. And yet equally, we've all had days, weeks, months where we look back on and go, well, that was a complete waste of time. Projects that we've done, that waste of time. So I think so often it's confused that people say either become a multimillionaire or maintain your soul and have family and so on. You can totally do both. And in fact, I might even argue that you'll both be happier, but actually it'll help you get clearer on how you want to get there. And with a great thing, a bit like shooting for the stars, even if you don't become a multimillionaire and you just become a millionaire, for example, but you're happy with your family situation and so on, you probably won't mind.
Yeah, I think on that, like I've mentioned it a few times now, it's like if you can find your enough, whatever your enough is, financially, time-wise, and relationship-wise, like it's finding your enough in every area. So if you're earning enough to pay your mortgage, pay your bills, live the lifestyle you want to live, you're spending enough time at work to do that, but then you have enough time at home with your family and your kids, you have enough that you can still go out and a date night once a month or once a week, depending on how lucky you are. And I'm not sure my wife wants to see me more than once a month at the moment, but she's currently heavily pregnant, so everything I do annoys her, and I'm better off out of the house.
Fair enough.
But yeah, we still try it and make sure we do a date night, because actually you lose that when you have kids and business and everything else.
Yeah.
You don't actually have that quality time together anymore, just the two of you like you used to. And we really tried to make sure we achieve that.
And I think you're tapping into something really important there, which I haven't heard stated, which is that important time, like we've just been talking about the importance of spending time with your partner, kids, etc. Actually, it's not an infinite game. Like there is a point at which actually playing Dungeons and Dragons with my kids or whatever, there is a point at which there's too much. Like they want breaks. They want to go do a different thing. They want to play with friends. Equally, as you say, my partner loves spending time with me, but I can be too much. And actually, if we were just date nighting every single night, it would be weird and it would lose its value.
It would be normal.
Exactly. It would become normalized and not be a special thing. And so you actually do want like some time apart and so. But that's interesting because that's not the case with work. With work, you can always do more. Like there have been times when my wife will say in an evening or at a weekend or during holiday time, whatever, is there like some work that you need to do or whatever, and typically what if there's some work she has to do, and so she wants parity, she's like, oh, is there stuff and I always think and will say it's like there's always work I can do, there's always work I could choose to do. Increasingly there's no work I need to do. And that's a really important concept, because when you realize that the amount of work that you have is infinite, like you can always do more. You could always make one more sales call. You can always post one more LinkedIn post or whatever. There's always something you can do. But that's not the case with family. As a result, fill it that way round. First, work it. And the same with exercise. You wouldn't run constantly. You would die. So as a result, you have to fill it first with like, okay, what do I need? What do I want for my health and well-being, both physical and mental? Okay, let's say I need to do half an hour of exercise a day that consists of a high intensity interval training session and then a run. And that's what I want to do, let's say. Okay, well, that's half an hour a day. Okay, what next on my next important thing? Time with partner, whatever. Okay, well, actually, for me, for example, I love having lunch with my wife. So we both work from home now, and so that works really easily. We both love running the kids into school in the morning. We'll often do a coffee kind of on the way back together and sometimes meet up with friends. And so those are things like, okay, brilliant, those things. And then, of course, holidays as well. Equally, you wouldn't want to spend all of your time on holiday. People imagine that they would. I've done 6-week holidays and it's amazing, but I'm kind of ready. Like I need to do something purposeful and so on. And so you can fill it up that way round. And then you go, right, now, work-wise, what am I going to do? And then you get really clear about what the levers you're going to pull to achieve it. And I think that's an important thing, because we often we think of everything as either infinite or finite. And there's a difference.
It's juggling it and making sure it works for you.
And filling it the right way around. There's a concept of if you're familiar with the putting the rocks in first.
Yeah.
So, that was a concept with, I think it's either Stephen Covey or Franklin Covey. He talked about having this big jar, and that if you need to get a load of gravel and sand and rocks and so on into the jar, and if you start with the sand and then the gravel, there's no room to get the rocks in. And if the rocks are the most important things, it's like looking after your health and time with your family. Actually, if you put the rocks in first, the gravel then fits around it and the sand fits around the gravel, and it all fits in the jar. And you can go on YouTube and find like this video and see it. But it's thinking, actually, what's the important stuff? Like, as I say, your health, your well-being, mental as well as physical, or the most important people in your life, whether it's partner, kids, friends, etc. And then like the emails, responding to emails, that'll find a way around everything else. Like put that in last. So yeah.
There, as you said, there will always be more work. There will never be your kid's second birthday again. There will never be the third birthday. And
sports day.
Well, the key thing that someone said to me was actually, you've got 18 holidays with her. If you don't take this one, you've got 17. Shit. Like, okay, I can't lose that. Like, we've realistically got 17 left. Like, let's make the most of it. So I think we've covered quite a lot about family. If we talk about work, you started work as an employee, business development.
So I kind of ran like little businesses that weren't like real businesses and was just me, like from the age of like 12 to 21, basically. And then after university, became a management consultant working out of London, working with large organizations like Honda and AstraZeneca and UK government and so on. And I was specifically solving their problems around processes. So I was like taking like how they do their finance processes, for example, for Transport for London. Like Transport for London happens to be, I think, the largest landlord in the UK, possibly in Europe, because they own like all the railway arches and the market stands, like anywhere where they've had to put like tubes under the ground. They basically had to buy the land above it, and so they then rent it all back out.
Right.
But that means that they literally collect rental income from thousands of tenants. And so they collect that money, but they also chase that money as well. And so they have like whole credit control function just for that, which is incredible to think about. Like, so you think of it as, you know, isn't it touch in, touch out and get on the tube? It's like, yeah, there's like this whole thing. And so I would work with their team to basically take a process that was done by like 19 people and work out, actually, if we make the whole process more efficient, how can we get it done by 3 and free up those people to do more value add stuff and so on. And so that was my job, was going into these organizations, essentially watching what people were doing, capturing it as processes, and then working out how do we improve the process and then how do we implement. And then over the years, I, as a consultant, like kind of moved up and became sort of more specialist in certain areas, but also developed understanding of the people side. So how do we get the best out of our people? And what was really interesting is whilst whilst I was learning a lot about, as a consultant, how to help organizations do that, at the same time, I had a line manager who told me that I would never be a good manager of people. And they told me that because I didn't bring people with me. Like, you know, I think fast. I'm quite creative and innovative. I'm technologically very good. You know, back when I was building websites, you know, like very few people were building websites. I'd literally writing it in HTML. I'd learn self-taught HTML code and so on. And so, you know, I'm very able at just doing a thing and running with it. But as a result, they were saying like, but you need to bring the team with you and so on. You'll never be a good manager. And at the time, I was devastated because still my aim was to build businesses. Even if I didn't want to do the whole bigger than Branson piece, I still wanted to build businesses. And so it left me with a fear of managing people. So when I then left to start my own businesses, I held back from hiring people as long as possible. When I then did hire, I remember reading Tim Ferriss's book, The 4 Hour Workweek, in which it talks about like hire contractors. And I was like, oh, brilliant. I can hire contractors and then don't have to manage people. I don't have to worry about like small talk, which I'm not very good at. Don't have to worry about like people bringing like big emotional things to me or managing them. Like, so that'd be great. And what I found is actually the reality is, whether a contractor or an employee, you still need to manage them because they still need clarity on what their goals are. They still need feedback when things aren't right. Like, they still need to be supported when stuff's going tough for them. Like, all of that's still the case. Just because your employment agreement is one or the other, it doesn't make a difference. And I remember, in fact, I hired a bookkeeper on my first like contractor hires to come take bookkeeping off me. And I was like, brilliant. They're experienced in this. They know what to do. Firstly, they made loads of errors, but I only found that like months later because I wasn't checking their work or whatever. I just assumed they'd be great at it. And also they then stopped working for me and I didn't notice for over a month and have literally never had any contact from them or been able to make contact with. But that wouldn't happen with my teams now because like we have weekly one-to-ones. They're on the company daily huddles and so on. Like, the interaction we have, no one would just fall off your radar like that. But back then, that's what I was trying to do. Like, I was literally trying to build businesses or build a business where I didn't have to do all of that stuff because I was so terrified of it. And I think a lot of my success after then came about because of realizing that as my biggest weakness, that I was terrible at delegation, that I was fearful of managing people. And as a result, when I overcame that, everything else changed in my life and became successful. And it's what a big part of what I now speak about on stages, talk about on the De-Stress Your Business podcast, help people solve through my businesses, is because I addressed one of the biggest flaws in my own performance.
Talk me, how do you do that? Like, you're sat there, you're petrified of employing people. You've got this in the back of your mind, like it's mentally challenging, like it's constantly there. Like, you don't just go and go, right, I'm just going to employ 3 people. We'll see how it goes. and move on.
No, indeed. And in fact, when you do that, and because I have done versions of that, and I know, clients of mine that have attempted that, what tends to happen is you maybe read a book or get some coach that says, look, you just need to let go. Like, okay, you're a control freak, just let go. And let's say hypothetically, you even do decide, right, okay, it's going to be hard, but I'm going to let go. So what happens, and as I remember specifically happened to me with a sales role, like I was getting to a point where I was so busy with various things in the business that I knew I was neglecting sales. I was probably only able to spend about a day and a half a week on it. So I thought my background wasn't sales. So I was thinking, okay, I'll get someone who is an expert in sales, who even has sold other. So this was for my first software business, which was SpiderGap, which is a 360-degree feedback solution. So typically bought by heads of HR, heads of learning and development, and so on. And so I got a salesperson in who had been selling other forms of HR software. So they know the market, they've got the contacts, etc. And so I brought them in and I thought, well, they will be able to do such a better job than me. Like, in you come. And we did a big recruitment process to make sure we got an amazing person. We started with literally a couple of hundred people at the top of the funnel and filtered down to end up with like this person. And put them in place and waited weeks and then months. And they weren't even getting the results I'd been getting. And it nearly cost the entire business because they weren't a cheap resource. Like one of the things when people were coaching me to say, oh, you need to let go, don't be such a control freak, like let go of something like sales. Don't try and spend all your time on something that you're weakest in. The problem was that as a result, I was like, okay, I need to get a really good person in, spend a load of money. And then when they weren't delivering, the business finances couldn't sustain it. So we had to make him redundant. We had to make a junior developer redundant, which, by the way, my business partner was having the same problem. He had hired a junior developer and then was finding all of his time was reviewing and fixing the things that the junior developer had done. And it's like, I could have just done it myself. And I think that's the problem, is that a lot of business owners are told or feel like, oh yeah, I just need to let go, or I just need to hire, or, you read books like Who Not How or whatever, and you come away with, oh, I just need to hire someone. But then with many of us have had that experience. If you bring someone in, often at great expense, and it doesn't work out. And I've seen, I know accountancy practice owners who have hired and then it doesn't work out, and they go, oh yeah, I've hired, bad hire, and they replace, and then they don't get better results. They go, oh, bad hire again. And so they replace, and they still don't get the results. And then at that point, they realize maybe it's not them, maybe it's me. And I find that a lot of the performance you get out of employees, yes, you want to hire great people, etc., but actually a lot of it's how you set them up to succeed. And so I have learned the hard way, and now teach, how do you set your team up to succeed? How do you make sure that it's easy for them to do things the way you want them done, so that actually it becomes easier for you as the leader to let go? Because I think if you let go and it all goes to shit, you're not going to want to let go, because most of us can't afford to.
Exactly. So, Emmanuel, that's where you are now?
Yeah. So I've now got, actively right now, I've got two software businesses. So one is SpiderGap, and that's being used by over 600 organizations around the world, including, and it's been used by well-known companies like Google and PwC and Swarovski and Grant Thornton and like load of others, right? And I've got a team there that they run it day to day without me. I'm not involved day to day because I've been able to build my business so it doesn't rely on me.
How many people?
So on that business, 10. Yeah. And then based on what we'd learned through building that business to 7-figure revenues and, profitable growth, no external investment, which is unusual for software businesses. So we still own it outright, built that, and then said, well, actually, I've got loads of entrepreneur friends that want to also extract themselves from the day-to-day in their businesses and be able to take 3, 4, 5, 6-week holidays and not work weekends. But I would show them how I was doing it. And a lot of the tools, the approaches, etc., were in my head, or, sticking plasters and workarounds that we were able to cope with, but don't make sense for others. And so what we did was say, well, actually, how could we solve this as an offering? And so we developed Dare Manual, which is a software platform that removes the friction from documenting your processes as interactive checklists that you can hand over, that makes it really easy. But importantly, how do you make sure that you empower the team to own the process and continuously improve it, so that, for example, when a mistake is made as leader, rather than you having to own, okay, let me change the process, instead you can attack the process with the employee and say, oh, that we had an invoice that went out with the wrong amount on it because of, wrong VAT or whatever. let's have a look. How did that happen? Like, let's look at the process. And so you go back to the process and go, oh, well, actually, yeah, we haven't made it really clear that if X, Y, Z, then it needs to be this VAT treatment. And yeah, of course, most people forget that because it comes up rarely or because it's complex. So then you get them to update the process and they own it rather than you. And then that problem never happens again. And it was that we built in the platform, is how do you remove the friction from that cycle? And then what we found is that just providing the platform on its own wasn't sufficient. Business owners would say, like, oh yeah, I love this tool, right? It takes friction out. But then they would struggle to find the time and the focus to actually solve the problem. So what we started doing then was workshops as part of like onboarding and the service delivery to take their biggest problem and solve it through a series of workshops and empower their team and train the team. And that worked beautifully. But what we then did was we realized that a lot of the problems we were solving were the same over and over. So, for example, we did a lot of work with accountancy practices. One of the most common problems is client onboarding. Yeah. Now, in most industries, client onboarding is easy. It's like they say they want to sign up. We start delivering our services. In accountancy, you've got professional clearance letters and anti-money laundering checks and transferring access of all their accounts and bookkeeping and possibly even changing what system you use. Like, it's complex. And at any point, the client could just be like, you know what, this feels like too much friction. I'll go back. And you, as an account, as the owner of the accountancy practice, you might have spent years building that relationship to a point where they feel comfortable enough to move over. And so your onboarding process has to be smooth. And what typically happens is if it's not, the leader steps back in to make sure that it's smooth because it's spent so much time building that relationship. But then what happens is, firstly, that takes up your time and bottlenecks your growth. But also it means that later on, when the client's got a question, they're more likely to come to you because their whole start of working with you has been with you. And so it has this repercussion that means that, and that's why you have to work weekends. And that's why, that's why, you fail to put the work out to your team rather than your team matching it. And so that's an example where we were solving that problem over and over. So we created best practice templates based on best practices and so on, and a whole playbook around most common mistakes. How do you solve it? How are the ways in which you can add the wow factor? So we built that as a playbook. And now it means that when we work with clients, we're able to get them to the result so much faster. And so I think for me, that's been a really cool thing where I've gone from the worst person you've ever met at delegation and letting go and not being a control freak and empowering team members and not getting frustrated team members. Like, I used to get incredibly frustrated at team members that weren't thinking as fast or thinking in the way that I was expecting. And now I use this approach of like attacking the process, not the person. And it's incredible. Like, it means that firstly, my team, the culture is incredible. Like, people love working in the organization, they feel empowered, but also they then are the ones continuously improving, making suggestions and so on, which means that I get to be more of a coach and kind of sit back without guilt. And that's been transformation. I love that we now get to do that with other organizations, particularly those that feel like, yeah, I've tried this and failed and so on in the past.
So that's an incredible place to be, where the team are coming to you with the suggestions and things like that. Like, we always do it. Like, mistakes happen. Absolutely. Got no problem with that. How do we stop it happening again? Where do we go? How do we fix it? And we always try and push that back. Like, if the team go, I don't know, but that's where I get frustrated, because I'm like, no, you need to come back to me with, okay, this is what happened. This is why it happened. But this is what we're going to do to stop it happening again, or improve that, because actually, continuous improvement we all need to do. The world's moving very quickly. AI is coming in and moving very quickly. Like, we need to make sure that we are with that. So I guess you've got two businesses kind of simultaneously running at the moment. How important is it to know your numbers?
Oh, absolutely crucial. And because arguably I have 3 or 4. So I then have 2, or at least particularly over the last 15 years, then 2 consultancy practices. So one that was my starting point, right? Initially, before my first software business, I was consulting. So, and then my wife now has a consulting business that we kind of set up together, and she does the majority of that now. But it's like, across all of those, I need to have a good understanding of the numbers. And so particularly like back when I was just running the consulting business, after leaving a consulting practice in London and starting my own, initially it was simple. It was, a consulting business with a small number of clients and big invoice values. Like, it might be invoicing 30, 50 or more £1,000 in a single invoice, the number of bank reconciliations was pretty low. Then when we added the software business, suddenly we were, initially at least, you might have individual transactions of like £79 or whatever. And both of those were through the same accounts and so on. And so it was really important to be able to split that out to see what's actually happening. And particularly when we've then added other businesses or, changed how we've done our pricing or whatever, is crucial, because without that understanding of the numbers, you've got no idea really what's happening, and we've always gone with instant data. Like I was the first client that my accountant had ever seen on Xero. Like, because when I set up that consulting business, which it was registered date was 18th of May 2010. So as a point of recording, just over 15 years ago, we would have been pretty early in terms of Xero, the accounting software in the UK. So when I said to my accountant, can we just do everything online and not do any paper? And they were having to explain, like, actually HMRC, they like paper still, and maybe that'll change. And of course, now it is changing, right? I literally got an email in my inbox this morning saying, as of April 2027, corporation tax returns, etc., must be electronic. There's going to be no paper option. And of course, there's making tax digital, etc. That's all coming in to change things as well. So it's funny that in 15 years, that has changed very significantly. But one of the big benefits of that decision 15 years ago, and particularly owning it myself, because I was a control freak and hadn't overcome these things, meant that I was very on it on things like bank reconciliations. And what it meant was that when I did start to delegate that, and I now have a bookkeeper internally who does all of that and a load of other stuff, she does bank reconciliations 3 times a week. Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays, she does bank reconciliations, which means that it's always good and up to date, and there's not a lot of data that's missing. So at any point, I can go and get my profit and loss, and I can dive into how the revenue split between my different businesses, and I can see it. I've got it consolidated, so I can see a consolidated account across all the businesses, but then I can see it split, and I can see the costs and so on. I've got budget lines and our variance against the budget, but I have all of that, and can get that at my fingertips whenever I need to be thinking about those things. And then crucially, I don't just rely on the fact that I can, because often I won't. Instead, we then have meeting rhythm to make sure that we actually review it. So we have our quarterly leadership team review and planning session. In fact, we had hours on Tuesday this week where we went through the numbers and we went through what were the rocks that we were working to, and are we happy with the progress, and what's the big things that we need to do to make progress against our annual goals and towards our 3-year vision and so on. And having that meeting rhythm, which includes the review of the numbers, forces everyone to make sure they're up to date on that. And I don't just do quarterly. We also have like monthly budget reviews, and we have, weekly team reviews. And then we even have a daily huddle that includes 6 numbers that everyone in the company gets visibility of, that firstly, everyone's being held to account. Like, I can't watch my revenue slide and feel like, no one knows, it's all secret. Like, everyone in the company will see that daily, and they'll see it against our target line, and they'll see it cumulatively against the target line. And so all of that visibility gives the team more control, I suppose, but also makes them more empowered to think, actually, if our revenues slip, I'll go look into it. Now, that's the other thing is, if I can see it's falling short, someone pretty quickly will come and tell me whether it's either new revenue or existing revenue that's the problem. And then let's say it's existing revenue, they'll then break that down and tell me, it was, for example, one of our clients, a state in the US, is one of their government organizations, they spent $50,000 with us last year, and actually they just haven't renewed yet, but they plan to. That's why we're getting that numbers. And, then I can go, okay, good. It's relax. Talk about de-stress your business. It's like that takes the stress out of the business, because the numbers we've got them transparent enough that we can then understand what's going on. And if that wasn't the case, if we just had a general trend slide that, we were upsetting customers, we would see that too and be able to take action on it, so that doesn't become stressful either.
Just on that word stress, I think I will dive into it, but I think the reason we get stressed is because we don't know or we don't understand. The reality is, if we know or understand whatever it is we're trying to do, it's not stressful, because you know what to do, you know how to fix it, you know where you're going. Like you said, knowing them numbers, if you know them numbers, it's not stressful. You might have lost a client. That's not stressful, because that's the problem. We can go and fix it. Or it might be stressful. You've lost 50 grand. How do we get another 50 grand? Okay, well, let's have a look at this information over here. Yeah, we've got that lined up. Okay, no problem. It's a 1-for-1.
I think you're absolutely spot on. And in fact, it makes me think of some of those cases where it could either it was stressful and why that was, or some things that could have been stressful, perhaps should have been stressful and weren't. So the two examples I'm thinking of is one in the early days of the consulting business. I remember literally walking around Battersea Park. So at the time I lived in Battersea, my business partner was living in Richmond, and we were literally kicking around the leaves of Battersea Park, hands in pockets, looking down, thinking, oh my God, we're going to run out of money soon. Like we had just done a load, it's very common in consultancy, feast and famine, right? We'd done a load of high value work, very high profit because you've got barely any costs. But then your lag time of a sale is so long. And we had got multiple projects in the pipeline, but no one going ahead. And so there was one in particular where initially they'd been all keen and then they'd just gone really quiet and weren't responding to emails or anything. And we were looking at it going, this might all be over literally in a few weeks. And so that was stressful because we had no idea what was going to happen, how we could turn it around. Because we also knew like, oh yeah, you could go out and make a load of sales calls. Good. That'll sort out your pipeline in 9 months' time. In the meantime, you've got to eat and pay your rent and all those sorts of things. So what are you going to do? And so that was certainly stressful because we didn't have any confidence in our numbers. Now, fortunately, suddenly got the email, I think it was later that day, saying, yeah, actually, we're going ahead. And that was like a £50,000 project with potential for more out of it. And you go, great, there you go, problem solved. Contrast that with, I remember in February 2020, we had a really, really good year, 29. I'd just run on the consulting, so on the software business, things were great. I think we were about to getting close to breaking the first million. I was still getting pulled into doing consulting work, particularly at Sony, and that was, paying really well. I'd just run a workshop for their 60 top leaders, and about, the future and PlayStation 5 and all this sort of stuff and what we're going to do. So things were brilliant. And my business partner and I, so he now lives in Sweden and I live in Stamford in Lincolnshire. So we both moved out of London. But as a result, it's important we meet up regularly to, make sure we're maintaining that relationship, because maintaining that relationship is, one of the biggest risks to the business overall, right? So we meet up at least annually for our annual general meeting, our AGM, but we need to meet up in person somewhere. So why not be the Alps? So we go and ski and he snowboards. It's actually really good because you're able to sit on a chairlift, potentially argue about something, and then calm down while you ski, and then sit back on the chairlift and sometimes be like, actually, no, I agree with you. Or I've now thought about why I struggle with this or whatever. So it's actually really good. But I remember that particular year, that particular trip, I remember getting into the cab with him to go from the airport to the resort. And I got in and I said, I think this, and at the time it wasn't called COVID, it didn't have the name COVID. I said, I think this virus that's, from Wuhan, I think that could be a problem. He said, what, the virus in China is going to be a problem? I said, yeah, because I've been looking at the numbers, talking about transparent, I've been looking at the numbers and I think this is exponential growth. I'm seeing doubling I think at the time it was maybe every 4 days or something like that. I'm seeing doubling that. And death rates, I think at the time there wasn't a lot of data, but it was something like 4% or something. And I was looking at that going, that's a really big problem, because even things like Ebola, where the death rate is much higher, the spread rate wasn't as fast. And actually death rate often means that your spread rate is reduced because people die before they can spread it. And so I was looking at this going, I think this could be a really big problem. And so I, on the plane, had been forecasting what does this look like? And I've probably still got spreadsheets that show me forecasting based on 10, 20 days of data, or maybe 30 days of data, what it could look like in a year and 2 years and 3 years. And so I was like, I think this is going to be a problem. And so I then spent the rest of the plane flight looking at, okay, if this impacted revenue, what would we do? And so I came up with, if it impacts revenue by 10%, by 25%, by 50%, by 75% plus. And for each of those scenarios, I came up with, what would we do? And like for 75% plus, it's basically mothball the whole thing. What does that look like? And so on. And so in the taxi, I was then sharing with my business partner, this is how bad this could go. And this is what I think we'd do. And we basically agreed that in the hour transfer. And then we were kind of like, okay, so if it goes bad, we know what we'd do. And then we spent the rest of the trip assuming I was wrong. Like, okay, assume that doesn't happen. and everything's fine. What do we do instead? Like, how are we continuing our growth? How do we now chart our projections from 1 million and beyond? And it did happen. And literally, it took about maybe a week and a half before even the financial markets responded. So now I think I'd have been, I've learned a lot about financial markets and how actually they're not as clever as you think they are. Because I was thinking, well, I must have got something wrong. So hilariously, I didn't do much investing and shorting and all those sorts of things. And although I'm anti-shorting anyway, so I wouldn't have done that. But I might have put more shares in Zoom than I did. But with the markets responded, COVID hit, with lockdowns, we had loads of customers that were basically just pausing everything they were doing while, particularly for SpiderGat, our customers are HR. So they were suddenly having to focus on, we've got to move to remote working, or we've got to furlough loads of people, or maybe redundant, whatever. And so doing a 360 feedback to support your employees' development was not high on their priority list. So they just delayed everything for 6 months or a year. And often, of course, a bit like in the travel industry, they don't delay it like to a particular point. They'll delay it 3 months, 6 months. And so you're always just hanging. You're like, oh, great, we move it to there. And then you get to that point, it's like, actually move it again, and it really killed the travel industry. But because we had a plan, because we were then just able to enact the plan and communicate really early on to our team about here's what we think could happen and this is how we will manage it and so on. And our priority is to make sure we look after you. And we think that this is, we're not expecting this to be forever. So as a result, we're going to manage this. It made it really effective. And so we didn't lose anyone. In fact, we managed to manage our costs and so on. It meant over a 6-month period from, basically April 2020, for 6 months, we managed to break even. Despite the fact our revenue halved, and partly, furlough helped, but actually not as much as you'd think, because we're a globally remote company. I've got team members in 9 countries across 5 continents, and the only ones you can furlough are UK employees. So I think I actually only had maybe 15%, 20% of my staff actually furlough applied to.
Christ, that sounds hectic. Like having not only UK staff, but trying to work out what's going on in all the different countries. Lockdowns were happening at different times. That sounds stressful.
In some ways, yeah, I suppose it's funny, like looking back, I think I just focused on the impact. I just focused on like, how do we make sure we look after people? How do we make sure we look after our clients? And how do we add more value to our clients? And then just, worked on that basis. I mean, it was, the stress came from the not knowing bits. It was the fact that you just don't know when it would turn back round and so on. Because almost, if you just knew the business was dead, you can kind of close it and move on with your life. But because that wasn't the case, like we had customers that were still really passionate to stay with us and actually were really grateful with how like relaxed we were with saying, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you can pause your subscription and we can pick this up in 6 months. These are unusual times and let's support you in other ways. But you're right, like different parts of the world were affected. And it's funny because potentially not in the way that you might imagine. I remember we've got a team member in Barcelona where for them, there was a period where you weren't allowed to go out at all, like not even for the exercise stuff that we had in the UK, unless you were like walking the dog. And so people would like borrow or even pay to walk dogs so that they could get out, right? On the flip side, we've got US employees who they were frustrated that there wasn't a lot. Like I've got a team member in Florida who's like, oh my God, like our mayor is just saying, oh yeah, this doesn't exist and it's all fine. But I know that's rubbish. And so I'm worried about my health and my partner and my vulnerable father and all that sort of stuff. And also people getting sick. Like, I had my stepfather, who I mentioned earlier, is a huge role model for me, died during COVID. Not of COVID, but he died during COVID. And it meant that we weren't able to spend time in the hospital. Basically, when he got discharged for final care in the last few days, he was at my mum's. And, fortunately, I've got my business in a position where I'm able to just step out and was able to go and spend the 2 weeks or whatever with her and just focus on that. And my wife is incredibly supportive, making sure that on the kids' side, all of that sort of stuff too. But that was really important. But, we weren't able to do a funeral, because it was during that time where you couldn't have more than 2 people together. And you want to be able, for you, but also for your team, you want to be able to support those moments that matter most. I've got a team member who, separate to all of this, she went through an absolutely horrific thing where her father was murdered. And that ripples through, her family, but also our entire team. And you want to be able in your business just to go, it's fine. Her original thing was, I'm so sorry. Like, I might need some time off. And it was
I'm
like,
slightly distracted.
yeah, exactly. It's like, of course you're going to need time off. Go do it. We've got this. Everything's fine, etc. And being able to support that over a longer period, and not. One of the things that we do a lot through Air Manual and Digital Business is like reducing the reliance on you as a leader, but also reducing the reliance on any individual.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because you'd be a bad boss that goes, I don't care that, Timmy's sick, or that you're, looking after your sick grandparent or whatever, I need the report on my desk by Wednesday. That's normally not the case. People tend not to be terrible managers like that. What's more likely is that you've got an employee who feels that no one else can do the thing that they do, and therefore they can't go on holiday properly without bringing their laptop because no one else knows how to do it. So they'll have to do it, and they'll open their laptop and do it. We talked a lot at the start of this podcast episode about being present. If your employees are going and spending time with their significant others, with their kids, etc., and opening the laptop because your business hasn't solved the problem of how do we reduce the dependence on you, that's on you. As a business leader, you do have the power to reduce the reliance, to make it easy for other team members to cover for them, and to have processes in place to cover when people are on holiday or have to immediately go out of the business because of some devastating event. And if you put that in place, you can have a business that reduces the stress, not just for you, but for everyone. And I think we should take responsibility for that as leaders.
Absolutely, I completely agree. The guys have started to every now and again log on when they're at home. We tell them off, like we pull it away. I've already told them I'm going to restrict their access out of hours and things like that. Come 4:00 we finish, they all go home. Like if they're here at 4:15, I will crack a joke like, what are you doing? Yeah, go and see your family, go and see your pets, I don't care what you want to do. Work is not the most important thing in life. It's a big part of it. Yeah.
By 4:30, you're writing their written warning.
Yeah. Come 5:00, I pull them in for a disciplinary that lasts an hour. So then they're stuck till 6. No. So yeah, I think that's huge. Skip a couple of these. I'm going to come back around. So AI is a huge thing at the moment. What impact is that having on you?
Incredible. In terms of all the technology that I have utilized over the last more than 2 decades of attempting to build businesses, even compared to right at the beginning when I was building my own websites, and I remember getting my first check for banner advertising on a website. You remember those days where literally you could put a banner on your website and people would pay for impressions, not even clicks. And I remember getting my first $75 check because I created in fact, it's funny how my career was cyclical. I created a PlayStation fan site, for walkthroughs for PlayStation games and cheats and so on, back when I was 14 years old or something. And I used to have banner advertising on it and I made money. But it's that was the internet, right? I would say AI has been more significant already for me. So I'll share some of the ways and particularly how I've been able to leverage it, because I know that I'm unusual in how much I'm using AI. So the obvious ways that most businesses, more forward-thinking businesses, are already using it. And if you're not, as a result, what are you doing? Get on this. So things like note-taking, AI, that should be sitting on basically every meeting that you have and should be creating call summaries. And you should be using that rather than spending a load of time typing up notes. And then you should be using that to help you with all your follow-up writing of emails. Even I did an impact review recently from a project that I've been doing with a large accountancy firm where they needed some help with something that aligned heavily to a research project that I've been doing, because I'm writing a book called The Accountancy Practice Playbooks. Literally a book with 25 playbooks of how to solve your problems, including, I mentioned, client onboarding or employee onboarding and so on, 25 of those. And so they needed some support around performance management. And so I said, well, tell you what, I'll do some consulting, which is less common for me nowadays, but I'll do some consulting because it will support my research. And what was amazing was delivered all this work, got some great results. I was doing the impact review with them, did the impact review call in which they were sharing, here's the positive impacts we've seen. Here's the positive impacts I've gathered from interviewing their staff. Here's the areas where I think there's still some issues. Have all that conversation, right? I then, at the end of that conversation, we agree that I'm going to put together a proposal for I'd help them solve some of the leftover bits and using my team as well. I've got process consultants and so on. Now, normally that would have been days, possibly weeks of procrastination about writing a detailed proposal. Because if I'm going to do a proposal, it needs to be really clear scoped, because consulting projects particularly, it's very easy for the scope to do this. And also you might be quoting for tens of thousands of pounds, and the client wants to know what am I going to get for that. And we don't charge by the hour, we charge based on the impact that we're having and the deliverables. Now, previously it would take me ages. Instead, what I did was I took the original proposal for the previous phase. I took the summary of the call that we had just had with the impact review. I put both of those into essentially ChatGPT and said, so here's the work. We've now completed that. Here's the conversation, the summary and the transcript of everything we've just discussed about the impact and what needs to happen next. Write the first part of a new proposal for the next phase based on the same structure as I had in the previous proposal. Just write the first part, which is the background, like strategic context. And it drafts that. It's like a couple of changes, but otherwise spot on. Right. Now write the next part, which is the request for support. What do they want help with? Boom. Spot on. Okay, now based on how I write proposals broken into work streams and deliverables and so on, draft what that would look like. Boom, 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 boom. Comes up with 6 work streams. It's like, ooh, I was imagining 5. Let me check. Da, 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 da. Yep, it's right. 6. And then later on, I was like, oh, actually, there's a 7th and we had that. And that's like, okay, do the next bit. Now, it was terrible at estimating effort and fees. It was way off on that, but it massively overestimated. Although you might argue, maybe it's right. But no, it's like, because we're able to be more efficient. But what was amazing is it meant in less than 5 minutes, I'd got a proposal drafted on what we were going to do next in the right format and so on. And that's one example. And I'm doing that multiple times every day. But it requires that I have the call recording with all the summary and so on. It requires that I know how to make good use of like ChatGPT and do good prompting. It requires that I know how to then iterate to get to where I want, and that I can then turn it into something I can then send off. And that's, I've got, because the other thing that I can then do is go, actually, we've built a custom GPT in ChatGPT, which basically where you, to those that don't know, you can create custom GPT where it's kind of pre-prompted. So you might have files already uploaded, guidance already in there about the format that you want, just so that you don't have to do that every time. And so I've got one for creating case studies, which incidentally, we took the prompt and put it into one of the playbooks that we've got on how to win more ideal clients. Has got like one of the processes is how to create great case studies, even if you're busy. And what it does is it basically means I could take the summary and the transcript of that impact review call and the proposal, chuck it into that custom GPT, and then it wrote the case study story, including quotes from the client. And then we could take that and chuck it in. I can use a junior member of staff to turn that into a pretty case study story that we can then share. And it's that, like, stuff like that is the sort of thing that you'd have on your like projects list. Like, oh yeah, no, we need to write some more case studies. And that would be a big thing. You'd be like, oh, do we need to hire a copywriter? But then we've got to provide the copywriter with all the content. They don't know what we've done. So we're going to need to sit down with the copywriter and we'll do a series of interviews where we talked about that. And then, of course, you do it and the information comes back and you go, it doesn't really focus on the impact enough. Right. Well, and you do that and we should go interview the client, and it just becomes this like months long project rather than something that you do as part of your day to day. And that's kind of looping around to, okay, so how do you get these results? So part of it is making sure that your inputs are captured. So your, conversations with clients or, your proposals, like all those things that you've got material that you can feed into the AI engine. But then the next thing is the risk is that you end up being a bottleneck because you're the expert in AI. And what you want to do is embed AI within human processes. So for example, for my podcast, for De-Stress Your Business, I provide here's the guest. Here's the stress point I want to talk about and go into based on the conversation we've had, which, by the way, sometimes I get based on the call summary we've had and get it to pull it out. And then I've got a team member who will then follow a checklist of how to take that and use AI prompts and custom GPTs that we've already created as part of the process to end up with everything: the title, the description, how I'm going to introduce the guest, the questions I'm going to ask, the outro that I'll do at the end, like all of that. And then that gives me everything I need for auto cue and all those sorts of things. I then record it, pass it back to them, and then they've got the process of how they use AI to generate the highlights reel and how they write these social posts and so on, which means that I'm not having to continue being the AI expert because they're able to take that and run with it. And that is something that just couldn't have happened before. And I've either had to do it myself or hire a senior, experienced podcast producer type person. Instead, I'm able to use existing team members and junior team members to do some of those things. One of the things that's been really cool as well in personal life is I mentioned that I've been writing books with the kids. Like, we leverage AI, but that doesn't mean that we just go, hey, AI, write a book. We start off with a concept, and we spend more time creatively thinking about this concept, and then we break it down and break it down and break it down. So for example, as a result of one of the games that we've been playing in Dungeons and Dragons for the kids, one of the kids' friends is particularly interested in time. I think he's a big Doctor Who fan, right? And so in the game, his character finds a book, and it was like The Chronicles of the Hourglass. And then separately, without a friend there, we were talking about it and saying, wouldn't it be cool if we create that book for him so that he's then got this prop at the table? We're like, well, what would be in it? And so we came up with an idea of what if you take principles of time, so both time management, which is a big thing I talk about, but also physical properties of time. For example, that time slows down with higher gravity, that time slows down with speed. Things that are now kind of known, and there's theories in physics and so on that are difficult to get your head around. What if we took those, but then created a series of short stories like Aesop's Fables that taught it through like fantasy things with little poems and so on in the shape of hourglasses and whatever. We got that done in about 24 hours. We now have a 180-page book that will be going on Amazon soon, like literally probably by the weekend, based on an idea that came up. That wasn't possible before AI.
I mean, over years, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. It's like that wasn't possible for us, but hypothetically, but I'm not sure we would. I think if, let's say that it's like, oh, it's just a matter of time, we'd do it eventually. I'm not sure we would. I think firstly, I know my brain, I wouldn't have the staying power for a project like that because I'd be thinking, what's the impact it's going to have? Like, is this going to make money? Like, what's the purpose here? The nice thing with a creative project like that is that it doesn't have purpose. If the only person that ever reads it is our family and our son's friend, so be it. And actually, we did it with some other books. So we've got this Shadows and Thorns series. And we did the first book, which is called 3 Lost Souls. And a peculiar thing as a result of the way in which we were creating it, it was like extra spacing. And we found that actually works really well if you're neurodiverse. It makes it much easier to read for a variety of reasons. And so we realized it's like, so my son is autistic, and is how I discovered that I'm autistic ADHD. But it's like, we realized that it's like, we're neurodiverse authors writing it like neurodiverse friendly books. And so as a result, the book's now been picked up in a local bookshop, and those like people are buying it, whatever. But there's no way that we'd have created it at all with no sense of where it could go if we knew it was going to take us months or years. Yeah. And instead, in a period of 3 months, we did 2 books.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. So, just talking about AI, you do a lot. You're clearly using it a huge amount. If you were talking to somebody now, let's say, who's using AI, they're like, yeah, it's great, I write a few blog posts with AI. One quick snippet, what would you tell them to do? Or how can they?
Yeah. So the common mistakes I see are that people don't they don't think about the topping and tailing enough. So they'll be like, and this often leads to people going, oh yeah, I tried writing blogs with AI, but it's rubbish, or it's not my style, or whatever. And I hear that a lot. And it's the way I think about it, and I often speak about it, is treat AI like a junior employee. Like, you wouldn't go to a junior employee in the office and go, oh, can you write a blog and put it out on the internet for us? It's like, it's going to be terrible. Of course it's going to be terrible. Like, the content is not going to be thoughtful enough, relevant enough for your client. The style that they write in is probably not going to be in line with your brand values and brand and so on. There might even be errors in it, whatever. Like, there might be factual errors in it. You wouldn't expect that from a junior employee. Like, you would know that you're going to need to brief them more than please write a blog, and that you're going to need to review it and probably do some iteration. And the problem is that if you don't do that with AI, you get the same problem. Whereas if let's say we create a process for how to get a blog written, that I could even give this process to a junior employee once they've got it written. Let's say first step includes go and get our highest performing blog to date. Grab that, the one that we're really happy with, like in tone and style and just everything. Like, it's the best one that we've ever done. Go get that. That's going to be part of our prompt to say, we want to create something a bit like this. Then you need to give some thoughtful, some thought to what's the creative thing that matters. So for example, like in the case of the book that we were writing, like, no one's done short story fantasy tales that are teaching children concepts like how gravity impacts time and the relationship between space and time, and general relativity is not being taught through fantasy generally to children. That's an interesting concept, but we're feeding that in and then using the AI to support us on the execution. And so the same goes for the blog article. How are you going to make sure that you're going to deliver real value to your clients? And there's loads of ways you could do that. So you might say, well, as part of that process, go and grab a transcript or, summary or whatever from a recent customer call and identify 3 really interesting, and you can use AI to help you do this, identify 3 really interesting, perhaps even counterintuitive points that the client clearly vibed with that we could then create a blog around. And then you go, right, take 1. Now break it down into 5 key points. Great. And then you might edit, as part of the process, edit that and so on. Get happy with the core of the content. And then, okay, AI, now take this concept, these 5 story points, and our previous blog that did really, really well and that's in our tone and so on, keep in that tone, keep in that style, now draft it. And then crucially, end of process, the review. Who does it go in front of that's going to make sure that it still fits in values and is actually delivering value and so on? Do you share it with a client for feedback? Do you have it internally to people that do it? Make sure it's good and then put it out. And then as part of the process, right back at the top, review how that did. How could you have improved that process to get there faster? Are there ways in which you can speed that up? Are there ways that you can make it get to the better answer faster? And if you do that over and over and make it part of the process so that your team can do that rather than you, then you're able to do some really amazing stuff. I was talking to someone, an author, and she was saying that her publisher says she's not allowed to use AI to write this book that she's doing for the publisher. And there's a variety of reasons for that, intellectual property issues, etc. Right? Particularly if you've got a publisher who's paying for it. Whereas with my kids, we're self-publishing, so we can do whatever I like. But for them, the publisher says you can't use AI. And she's an author, she's a creative person and so on. But as she said, I'm allowed to use a thesaurus. I'm allowed to use rhymezone.com. If I'm writing, for example, I'm writing a poem and I need a rhyming word, I can write in time and it will give me all of those. And I can write, I want words that mean the same as direction and, but also use the word as time and it'll help me with that. That's fine. I'm allowed to use a spelling and grammar checker. I'm allowed to, send messages and use autocomplete. All those things that actually we take for granted that we're just allowed to do. And yet we say that there are people that say, oh, but you can't use AI for that. It is, when you use it right, it is essentially just a very advanced autocomplete when we're talking about LLM specifically, not all AI.
I mean, it's also the same as Google. You can sit there and you can Google stuff and you can pull up whatever comes up on Google and do all the research. That does it exactly the same, a lot quicker and a lot more efficient.
Yeah, it comes down to how you top and tail. Yeah, exactly. Like, what are you searching for? How are you searching? How are you then checking your sources? Like, all of us can prove anything through any statistic we find out online. Like, there's always some terrible publication out there or blog or whatever. It's down to how reliable it is. So yeah, you have to do the same thing for AI. And I'm seeing that as another weakness, by the way. Like, I think you're right that some people go down the route of, I'm going to use it to write blogs, and they do a terrible job because they don't work at the process. The other one I see is research. People say, oh yeah, it's great, I use it for research. And I said, please check the sources. Like, I've had it where I'll give it just a PDF, not the whole of the internet. I'll give it a PDF, like for the book, for example, and say, help me improve this. And it'll be like, yeah, this is great, this is great, this is great. Oh, by the way, I think there's inconsistency here where you said that this happens. It's completely fabricated, completely hallucinated. Like, that doesn't happen in the book, and it's just said it does. Now, if it can do that for one PDF, imagine what it's doing when it's looking at the internet. And I've had that too. Like, I'll say, give me some statistics that around this topic, and it'll give it. And you're like, oh, brilliant. That's exactly right. And it'll even give you a URL for where it got it from. You follow that URL, you might find a broken page, or you'll get to the page and you'll search for that data. You can't find it, or it's misquoted or whatever. It's really dangerous for using it for that purpose. And so that's one of the things I'd say, be extra careful for research. It's why it's really good for like creative writing, like blogs and all those sorts of things, or writing a case study. But again, like with a case study, got to be careful about what was verbatim quotes. I mentioned there, like, oh, and it's using quotes. We go back and check. Did they actually say that?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it either misattributes it to the different person, or it's completely changed the quote, or it's fabricated or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. So right at the end, we do these cards. They're Diary of a CEO. Essentially, they are questions that get asked in their podcast, really quite thought-provoking, things like that. So we're going to choose one each, and we will ask each other the question.
Cool. So I'm picking one to ask you.
One to ask me.
Question.
Do you want to go first or second?
I'll ask you first.
Okay.
Yeah. When it all gets too dark, what helps you find the light?
So I think I might have referenced this before, but a couple of years ago, I don't know if you want to call it burnout or whatever. I got home, came to the work, had a tough day, drove home, parked up on my drive at, let's say 4:15, whatever the time was. I didn't go into the house until 4:48. And my wife said, "What were you doing out there?" Genuinely, I said, "I don't know." I sat in that car silent, like blacked out. I don't know, like I was just in my own world, like fed up, had enough, stress, whatever it was, I can't tell you. And I said, "I don't know. I don't know where that half an hour has just gone." Like, and at that point, I realized something needed to change. Something wasn't working, and so coming back to the question, what was the light in that? It was the realization that there's more to it than work. And I think that's what it was. At the time, I was trying to do these extra hours, trying to do these extra days, trying to do all of this stuff. And it was actually just, what am I doing? Why am I doing that? And it was basically, there was a client paying us. It was probably 25% of our turnover, and demanding everything, wanting everything. And it was that point that I realized no client is worth anything like that. Did attack them like 3 months later. His partner said, like, yeah, that's not even worth it. Like, let's get rid of them straight away. And I was saying, afford to get rid of them. Like, look at what it does, look at the impact. We did. In fact, we lost two of our biggest clients at the same time, which essentially was about 35% of our turnover at the time. Over the same month, we lost both. Best things we ever did, because we've rebuilt from it. We go back to what we do and how we do it. So what was my light? Essentially, it was looking at family and talking to family and talking to friends. So my business partner, I would also call her a very close friend. Like, and it's saying it's not worth it. Like, there is much more to life than work. So it's just sitting back and thinking about what is worth your stress and worth your time. And if it's something you can't change, there's nothing you can change about it. It's not worth stressing about. And if it's something that you can change, well, go and do it. Don't sit and stress about it, or find out how to do it. So I don't know if I've answered your question,
I
but
think you have. Yeah, no.
it's fairly close.
Yeah, I think, and thanks for sharing, because I think that candor around how dark, like, and I've heard, partly because the nature of what I do, I've heard so many equivalent stories of the just hitting burnout, or realize that moment of what am I doing this for, or that realization of, I'm hating work or working with a particular client or whatever, taking that hard decision, particularly where it means that, at least for a period, you won't have that confidence over the financial aspect, is so important. And I really like that as I see two things. One, I see the light that your family offered as a direction, like, the lighthouse out there to go, actually, this is more important. But also I like the light of almost knowing that one of your darkest moments in your business has resulted in some of the best results. And I think that's often true. I think if we look back, like, in my story, like when I talk about various things that happened in my past that made my life harder, whether it was parents' divorce, or being told I'd be a bad manager, or having team members that weren't performing and nearly losing the business or whatever, fundamentally, the impact has been a positive one in the long run. And I think, yeah, I really like your observation there.
Thank you. So my one for you. If there was one singular idea that had the most profound impact on your life, what would it be? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
If there was one singular idea that had the most profound impact on my life, I would say it's prioritization. It's there's a great book called The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, where they talk about literally like what's the one thing, and there's even a question in it, which is, what's the one thing that, if it were done, would make everything else easier or not required? And I think that concept of getting really clear on the small number of things, or ideally the one thing that you can do right now or over the next bit of time, that's going to move the needle the most in the direction that you actually care about. Because I think that there is always more work you can do. There's always a long list of ideas that you've got, or problems that you need to solve. And I often experience that with my clients is that through Air Manual, for example, they'll say, oh yeah, Alexis, I definitely need to systemize my business. I need to sort out my processes for every part of it. Like I'm too tied into everything. We get repeated mistakes. We're just always busy, etc. Like, yeah, help me. And like, we need to document every process in the business. I said, no, you don't. No, you don't, because I'm sure I can find a process that will never need documenting in your business. For example, for some businesses, don't need a process for your team to go to the toilet, right? Now you might be thinking, no business does. If you're a nuclear reactor or a heart surgery operating room, the operating theatre, you probably do want a process for how someone goes to the toilet mid-operation, because they're going to need to leave the room, and there's all sorts of things about how do they hand over and make sure that's okay, and scrubbing up on the way back in, and all those sorts of things. You need a process for that because it's important for that operation. But then they won't need processes for other things that go on. And it's all relative. So often when we talk about when you're solving your processes, sorting your systemization, it's about shining the spotlight on what's your biggest problem. Like, what's the thing that causes you most stress? What's the thing that holds you back in your business the most? Where are you currently having to spend most of your time? When you shine your spotlight on that and pick one priority and then apply critical thinking and time and resource to it, my experience is it disappears. Like, you solve it and then your reward is a new problem, a new priority. Like, for example, let's say that your biggest problem is you've got loads of leads, but then you're not converting them. And as a result, you could be doing more delivery and making more money, but you're not converting leads. It's like if you try and spread yourself and you're still doing like working hard on improving lead generation and on your operations, you don't solve it. Whereas if you say, actually, we're going to solve the problem of sales conversion, and you work on that for, let's say, 3 months, you'll probably solve it. And then you'll have a new problem called, we need to scale our operations. And then you'll solve that problem, and you'll have a new problem called, we need more leads. And then you solve that problem, and then conversion, and it goes in that journey, and you kind of go through loops in your business, solving the problem at a better level each time. But that only happens if you shine the spotlight on what your one thing, your top priority is.
So you focus on the one priority that you need at any given time.
I try. I am terrible at it. I think partly because I'm ADHD, and so my brain is constantly thinking of many things at the same time, which has huge benefits. Like my creativity, my ability to have a conversation like this and come up very quickly with a load of ideas, group them, structure them, and work out how I'm going to deliver it is a special skill of mine. It also makes it very hard for me to focus on one thing at a time. And sometimes I'm not sure even whether that's the right thing for me. But as a business, we absolutely need to. So I have to overcome those things and find mechanisms and tools that we have in the business to make sure that my team, particularly, are focusing on the rocks. They're solving the biggest problems first. And that wherever possible, I'm being forced to, which often means for the most important things in my business, I have meetings, even with one person, partly just to hold my feet to the fire and make sure I do that thing. I remember there was a period for my consulting practice where I knew that the most important thing I need to do, even when I'm busy with projects, is get out there and sell. Like, go and have conversations with business owners about their biggest problems. And typically I'd work out how to solve it and sell a consulting project. But the bit I'd hold back on is that first call. I was terrified of making that call. And so what we did was we set up these literal, like, I can't remember, it's probably weekly hour-long sessions. And that's all it needed. It needed an hour a week, where me and my business partner would sit down together and we would take it in turns to make that phone call, because it forced us to do it. And if we didn't have that, we didn't build a sales pipeline. When we did have it, we did. And I've had that in numerous parts of my business over a decade, and it's completely changed it because it's forced me to actually work on that thing that's a priority and important. Otherwise, I'm very, very likely to just go and come up with another idea for a children's book and use some AI or create a song. That's the other thing I've been doing, like creating songs and so on, just because I find it fun.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on. That's been incredible. It's been a great chat.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks very much for having me.